We talked about the differences in the way people, like the 3 differences in the way people can invest to acquire customers. And I mentioned to you guys that break even is when your maximum allowable equals your AOV. Whatever your AOV is. This is why AOV is so important. Break even is when you spend $1,000, you make back $1,000. You spend $2,000, you make back $2,000. At break even, you are acquiring customers for free. You're acquiring leads for free. Your bank account is no less today than it was, a handful of days ago. At this level, right, maximum allowable acquisition cost is equal to AOV. That's why AOV is so incredibly important, right? We talked about nobody in this room should ever be operating at mom and pop. We talked about the investor level is where maximum allowable acquisition cost is some number greater than AOV. It's really AOV plus a percentage of lifetime value. We talked about the only time that you should ever operate at this level is when you, what did you say yesterday?
You got enough money.
You got enough money, meaning you got the cash flow is really what it is, and you know your numbers. So you know your numbers, and you've got the cash flow. This is really all about floating, right? This is really all about floating. I think we talked yesterday. We talked a little bit about Joel Marion, right? Somebody mentioned that, and I think I said, Agora goes 6 months. Agora Financial, my client goes 6 months before they break even. And so imagine that. Think you can do the math of what cash flow they need for any company really if they're going, call it even, let's say they're going $30 negative, just let's say for argument's sake, $30 negative, and let's say they're only acquiring 1,000 customers, which mind you, they're acquiring 4,000 customers a day. But let's say you were acquiring 1,000 customers, you're going $30 negative, that's $30,000, right, that you have to float for 6 months. And that's, in this example, imagine if you were acquiring 1,000 new customers a week. If you're acquiring 1,000 new customers a week and you're going negative $30, you're floating $30,000 for 6 months, and you're doing that every week. You got to have some deep pockets, and that's why you need to know your numbers. For us, the reason why I mentioned, so on our book, we sell a $7 book. We bring in about $42 in AOV. Our maximum allowable acquisition cost is $60, $65.
On the $7 book, is it that bump that you showed where it's 27 or 29, and then what's after that to get to 42? What's your?
Yeah, so I believe, and I could probably pull it up later, but I believe we have a $299, I believe, offer. That is the first add-on offer, and then after the order form, after the bump, so we order form with the bump. After that, I believe we've got a $299, and we're constantly testing, but I believe the control is $299. For folks that don't take that, we've got a payment plan on that. And then we have a second upsell, which is kind of a slack adjuster, if you will. So it's like a $4.99 or $6.99, something like that, where we know, such a small percentage take it, but we only need a small percentage to take it to impact AOV significantly.
So yeah, nothing under $100 in that.
No. And so that is because of how low the initial price is, the $7. Like, you know what I mean? I know, and you'll see this later when we start to play around numbers. It's all math, because there was one offer in there, and this is important. So, I want you to understand how I think mathematically about this. There was one offer that I showed, the bump, and it was 37. Right, it was 37. And I remember, I was thinking about that after, because most of our bumps are in the 20s. Most of them are not 37. And I remember, whenever we set up a campaign, I always run projections. And so I run projections of, okay, I know what roughly our average, cost per click is. So like I know what it costs us to get a visitor to the page. And so when I do projections and I say, okay, this is the main product, right? We've got a $7 product, let's say. We've got let's call it a $15 bump. We've got a $49 upsell. And that's it, let's just say, right? We've got a $7 product, we've got a $15 bump, and we've got a $49 upsell. Then I say, when I do projections, I use weak conversion numbers. Whenever I do projections, I always use bad numbers, bad performance numbers. I'm not looking for like, well, if we convert 10% here and 20% here and 70% here, this is a great campaign. So I always I do the opposite. I go like, if this thing tanks, and
how bad is it going to be?
Let's look at we got a 1% sales conversion on this bad boy, or 2% sales conversion. We got a 5% on this bad boy. I look at the numbers, and very quickly you'll be able to see, like, all right, let's see now. Okay, this is what we're looking at if it performs poorly. And I think I mentioned, maybe it was during the intensive and not. So I think I mentioned to you guys. Did I mention that? So it's always easier to make a higher ticket product work. It's always easier economically to make a higher ticket product work. Like, did I talk about how I published the Tripwire hoax? Did I talk about that with you or with them?
I think you talked with her.
Yeah. I did, okay. Right, and so I talked about, I did. Right, yeah, you need a 7%, blah, 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 right? I love campaigns when I go into a campaign and I see, man, as long as we get a 0.5% sales conversion with no upsell, no bump, no nothing, we're good to go. Like, that's the game you want to play, because that's an easy fight to win, right? What I don't want to see is we need a 10% sales conversion here, a 20% sales conversion rate here. So what I look at is this. I look at the projection, $7 product, $15 bump, $49 upsell. And I say, all right, these are low projection numbers. This is what it's going to cost us on average per click. Then I look at what is the pricing that we need to make this, right? What we start to play around with the numbers. If we up the price of the bump from 15 to 20 and we lower conversion a little bit, if we up the price of the upsell, from 49 to 99, right, and we lower the conversion rate, sometimes I see, wow, this is not going to work unless we put a second upsell in here. Or this won't work unless the bump offer is at least at 37. And so that's where we begin. That's where I always begin, because oftentimes, like, look, understand this, get this, write this down, remember this, right? You will not fix bad economics in a campaign with better marketing. Meaning, if you're going in thinking like, if the numbers don't play, if somebody said to me, I want to sell a $7 book and I don't want to have any upsells, any downsells, any bump offers, right? And I want to profit on the front end, good luck. Right? Like, improving the marketing, doing better marketing. You could hire whoever you want, the dream team. It ain't gonna work because the numbers don't work, right? The numbers do not play out. Knowing the cost of media and knowing what your conversion rates would need to be, that's not a game that you want to play. And so you want to go in looking at, and so that's where that number came from. I remember specifically looking at it and having a conversation with Damien and saying in this campaign that it will not work at this. Like, we're not going to go into this campaign with a bump offer saying at 24, 29, or 26 that this thing needs to convert at 48%. Like, and as long as we're at 48%, we're golden. No, that's not the game that we play. Make sense? We talked about, and so last thing with this, as it relates to operating as the investor, we talked about there are two dynamics to this, right? Because often I'm asked, like, well, how much of lifetime value should I use to acquire a customer? So, okay, so our AOV is $50, right? And so how much now of lifetime value should I be willing to add into AOV to use to acquire a customer? That depends on your business. That completely depends on your business. And so what I would say is what you need to consider is how negative are you willing to go and how long are you willing to go that. Those two factors are critical, because the shorter the time frame to recoup ad spend, the quicker you're able to recoup ad spend, the more negative I'm willing to go. Let me say that again. The quicker, the shorter the time frame to get to break even, the more negative I'm willing to go. The longer, the less, for obvious reasons, right? The math, I'll go broke before, right? If we were acquiring customers and going negative $200, we're gonna have a problem. Everybody should be here at a bare minimum. If you got the cash flow and you know your numbers, you really should be here. And again, understand this, the game is easier here because you have a higher maximum allowable acquisition cost. The higher maximum allowable acquisition cost, the easier the game is. So this is easier, this is safer. Everybody should operate here. Everybody that's got more than one product, everybody in this room should operate here. But you will grow, you'll grow quicker here, and it's easier here.
It's easier, but there's more risk?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. So, which is...
The market could change something.
Sure.
Like you can't, yeah.
Yeah, sure. I think, so there's definitely more risk. Absolutely. Anytime you're going negative, right, like it's a risk. Of course, how negative you go and for how long you remain negative also impacts risk, right? So to some extent, if you went negative $1 and you went per customer and you went negative that $1 for 1 week, very minimal risk, because we know that you're going to be able to recoup that dollar. So I will tell you that you absolutely can get in trouble if you get too aggressive at this level. Right? Like you absolutely, and remember that for what it's worth from a business perspective, that cash flow is king. Not profit, not cash flow is king. You run out of money, it don't matter how many people still owe you money in the future, bye-bye.
What's 95% small business?
It absolutely is. That's the beauty, just as a side note, that's the beauty of, the idea of, accounts receivable and, that it changes the whole dynamic of a business. That's why the beautiful thing, like whether it's supplements, whether it is, certainly training products, the fact that there is none of that relatively. But yeah, you're absolutely right. You run out of cash, bye-bye. We know AOV, it's important because it determines how much you can spend to acquire a customer. It also makes your business resistant to increasing media costs, and we know that that's the natural order of things. Media costs, if it's a valuable source of traffic, it's only going to increase. We talked about why AOV instead of sales conversion rate. That the reality is that not only is it easier to increase AOV, it's quicker, simpler, there's a lot more low-hanging fruit there. Sales conversion rate is much more difficult to impact. Also, we're not playing a sales conversion rate game. We're playing a financial exchange game. It's all about it's all about what can you invest to get a new customer. And that's why I also, as a side note, I refer to it as what can you invest, not spend. You're investing in the acquisition of an asset that's got a value today and a future value. And you're playing this financial exchange capability. And remember, understand this, right? Understand this. Keep it as simple as this. You are investing in the acquisition of an asset, right? That asset has a value today and a future value. Right? There is a value today. The more that you can afford to spend to get this asset, the more of these assets you can get. Your job is to get as many of these assets as possible and then grow their future value and continue to grow their future value. To continue to acquire these bad, knowing that financial exchange, acquire these bad boys and grow their value. How do you grow their value? Through the back end, through more purchases, through caring for them, through nurturing them, through putting an iron gate around that herd, for developing them, for making sure that you give them what it is that they want, they need, and giving them more and more opportunities to buy. Make sense? So we started going through some AOV boosters. I said these AOV boosters, we're not talking about things to generate the sale. We're not talking about different tactic strategies to generate the sale. We're not talking about ways of increasing sales conversion. And we're also not talking about decreasing order form abandonment rate. As a side note, what I would tell you guys to just make a note of, it's something maybe later on that we, after today, that we can kind of chat about. Order form abandonment rate is a much bigger problem for most marketers, for most online businesses than they realize. In many cases, you can see a 60+% abandonment, meaning you do your job, you get people over to the order form, and then 6 out of 10 people bail. What you do with those people that bail and how you treat them and how the messaging that you use with them can play a massive role in what percentage of those people will come back and order from you. Also, right, like what you do on mobile with your order forms, all these are factors, but none of that is what we're talking about.